In this video, we will show you how to enter supplier invoices in your accounting system. We will explain how you can use text rounding methods in Odoo. I will also explain how you can check the invoice total. And of course, we will show you how you can create your supplier invoices. Now, before creating a supplier invoice, let me explain how the invoice total can be checked in Odoo and how you can set the rounding method for taxes. So let's go to Settings, Accounting. And here you see that Odoo allows two different methods for tax computation. The round per line method means that for each tax, the tax amount will first be computed and rounded for each order or invoice line. Then, these rounded amounts will be summed, leading to the total amount for that tax. If you sell with tax included in prices, you should choose round per line, because you certainly want the sum of your tax included line subtotals to be equal to the total amount with taxes. The round globally method means that for each tax, the tax amount will be computed for each order or invoice line. Then these amounts will be summed, and finally the total tax amount will be rounded. Now let's take the Check the Total of Supplier Invoices option and click Apply. And with this option, a new field will be added to the supplier invoice, namely the verification total field. When you have an invoice with a lot of lines, this option will allow you to check the invoice total on validation of the invoice. By entering the total invoice amount, you make sure that on confirmation of the supplier invoice, the invoice total will match with the total of all invoice lines. If both totals do not match, you won't be able to validate the invoice. This way, you can avoid rounding errors to slip in. Now, to encode supplier invoices in Odoo, you need suppliers in your database. You can create a new supplier from the Suppliers menu, as you have seen before. But of course, you can directly create a new supplier from the Supplier Invoices menu. Of course, you can also create an invoice for existing suppliers. We will now start by creating a new supplier invoice. So let's click Create. And we will create an invoice for the Odoo, your Passbox provider supplier that we have in our system. So you can type part of the name in the supplier box and then press the tab key. But of course, you can also use this list to open the supplier and make some changes if you want to. And you can also start typing here and create your new supplier from here. When we select an existing supplier, all default data from the supplier form will be displayed for this supplier, such as this account. Now, we have received the supplier invoice, so we take that piece of paper and we enter the supplier invoice number here in this box. We can also add a payment reference, and the payment reference will be used in payment orders. So it can be the same as the invoice number, or it can be a specific reference that the supplier put on your invoice. According to your accounting localization, the payment reference can also be a structured communication. So here we simply add the supplier invoice number because that is also the payment reference in this case. In the invoice date box, you enter the invoice date as it has been printed on the supplier invoice. You can simply start typing the date here, or you can use this agenda field and click select the date. You can enter the due date of the invoice yourself, but if you use a payment condition, which will be displayed in the payment terms, the computed due date will automatically be proposed when validating the invoice. So here, let's select 15 days payment term. As I added it here, it will not be proposed by default for the supplier. If I want to have this payment term proposed automatically for the supplier from now on, I click the list, I go to the accounting tab of the supplier, and I select here the 15 days. I save, and from now on, this payment term will automatically be proposed for each invoice. Now let's enter the verification total, which is printed on the invoice and which field will allow you to check the supplier invoice amount. We will create an invoice line for 15 POS boxes. We can change the description if we want to. According to what our supplier specifies on the invoice. So we change the quantity to 15 and we have a unit price of $58.57. The default VAT percentage that has been added to the product will automatically be proposed here. If your product is not linked to a default tax, you can manually add the tax code here, or you can change your product settings as we did for the supplier and add the default tax on a product level. So now let's save, and then we can have the tax calculated. So we click edit and we click update. And the total amount of tax will be 131.63, which results in a total invoice amount of .13 instead of .12. However, your supplier invoice is the correct one, so we need a tax of 131.62. Now, how can we change that? We simply click the amount in the tax line and we change this. We save. And now we shouldn't use the update functionality, which will appear when I click edit. We shouldn't use it because when we click update again, odoo will recalculate the taxes. So of course, to be able to edit the tax amount here, you have to make sure you are in edit mode. Okay. Now we validate the invoice and we have encoded our first supplier invoice, showing the number that we set in the sequence.